At dawn, in one of the driest places on Earth, a row of tall nets stands against the wind, and every thread is beaded with water. It drips into tanks below. Clean, drinkable water, pulled straight out of the air, in a desert where it has not rained in years. Engineers spent years building this. They called it a breakthrough, but it is not new. 1,000 years ago, a tribe on a small Atlantic island was doing the exact same thing, and a Spanish garrison that found it called their version a miracle. Then a storm destroyed it, and the knowledge vanished for centuries. This is how a secret that old ended up making water in the Sahara today. The story begins on El Hierro, the smallest island in the Canaries, long before any engineer drew a single net. The island had almost no springs and no rivers. By every rule, no one should have been able to live there. But the native Bimbache people did, and their secret was a single tree. They called it the Garoe. Every morning, thick fog rolled in off the Atlantic and caught in the tree's broad leaves, and the moisture ran down into stone basins carved beneath it. One tree, watering an entire people. When Spanish conquerors arrived and saw water appear out of dry air, they were stunned. They called the Garo a holy tree. For years it watered not just the Bimbache, but the Spanish soldiers who took the island, the only steady water source for miles. The Bimbache had hidden it from invaders for as long as they could. Then in 1610, a violent storm tore the tree out of the ground, and the miracle was gone. The Spanish thought it was all magic. It was really just physics that nobody had a name for yet. Fast forward almost 400 years to a poor fishing village in Chile called Chungungo. The wells had run dry, trucks hauled in water once a week, and families rationed every drop. Children there grew up thinking that was simply how water worked, something a truck brought in, never something the land itself could give. Then researchers noticed the same thing the Bimbache had. Thick fog from the Pacific rolled over a nearby mountain called El Tofo nearly every day. So they strung up large flat nets of plastic mesh across the ridge and waited. The fog hit the mesh, condensed into droplets, and ran down into pipes. On a good day, those nets pulled up to 15,000 liters of clean drinking water out of the air. For a while, Chungungo had water for the first time in living memory. But the nets were rigid, and the mountain was not gentle. One night, a storm came through, with winds over 100 kilometers per hour, and shredded the nets apart. The investors walked away. Experts declared fog harvesting a dead end. That should have been the end of it. Except a German industrial designer named Peter Trautwein could not let it go. He studied the wreckage of the Chilean nets and saw the flaw right away. The old nets fought the wind, so the wind won. Trautwein went back to his workshop in Munich and built something that did the opposite. A flexible, three-dimensional mesh, mounted so the wind passes straight through it instead of tearing it apart, while the tiny fog droplets still catch and run down into tanks by gravity. No pumps, no electricity. He called it the Cloud Fisher and founded a company, Aqualonis, to build it. If watching a 1,000-year-old idea come back from the dead is your kind of story, subscribe to Comeback Atlas, because the Cloud Fisher had not even faced its real test yet. That test came on a mountain in Morocco called Boutmezguida, on the dry edge of the Sahara, about 1,200 meters up. The wind there can hit around 120 kilometers per hour, the same kind of gust that destroyed the Chilean project. This time the mesh held. The Cloud Fisher nets, around 1,600 square meters of them, stood through the storms and kept pulling water from the fog. But a new problem appeared. All that water was now stranded on a peak, while 16 Berber villages sat far below it with no power to pump anything anywhere. So the team solved it the way the ancients would have, with gravity. They hand-laid more than 10 kilometers of pipe through bare rock, dropping about 500 meters in elevation. That drop alone built steady pressure around 5 bar, enough to carry water to every village without a single electric pump. Local women now run the whole network themselves, reading the flow from sensors linked to their phones. Before the system, the village women spent up to 5 hours a day just hauling water. After it, that time nearly vanished, and families started growing vegetables in their own gardens. There was still one enemy left, and it came from the desert itself. A Sahara sandstorm can coat the fine mesh in dust within minutes and choke it until the nets stop collecting. The fix came from an unlikely teacher, the cactus. In the Atacama, certain cactus spines are shaped to shed and clean themselves. Aquilonus copied that idea into the mesh, so the first 15 minutes of every fog simply rinse the dust off the nets before the real collection begins. The desert that should have killed the system became the thing that keeps it clean. And here's where the whole story folds back on itself. While the German engineers were patenting the newest water technology on Earth, archaeologists in southern Peru were digging up the oldest. In the Moquegua Valley, in dry hills near the coast, they found stone channels and basins built to catch fog and funnel it into storage. They dated them to around the year 1001, built by the Chiribaya people, centuries before the Inca ever rose. These were not crude. They were deliberate fog collectors, engineered for a desert. The same trick the Bimbache used on their island, the same trick trout wine would later rebuild in steel, sitting in the Peruvian dirt 1,000 years too early for anyone to notice. The cloud fisher was never an invention. It was a rediscovery. Trout wine and his team had spent years building, in steel and modern mesh, what a forgotten culture worked out by hand 1,000 years before them. The world noticed. In 2016, at the United Nations Climate Conference in Marrakesh, the Morocco project won a Momentum for Change award, recognized as one of the smartest low-cost fixes on the planet. But the honest part of this story is the hardest part. The fog that all of this depends on is thinning. As the climate warms, coastal fog is shrinking by roughly 3% a year, which means the very thing these nets harvest is slowly disappearing. So, in their Munich labs, the Aquiloni's team is already at work on a finer mesh, one that can wring water out of thinner air. The oldest water technology on Earth is now racing the climate to survive. And right now in the desert, those nets are still dripping. A 1,000-year-old secret, declared impossible, rebuilt out of steel and gravity, and quietly making water in the Sahara right now. Subscribe to Comeback Atlas, because the next thing the world wrote off and got back might surprise you even more.